Welcome to this explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're here today because we are tackling a topic that honestly usually stays locked behind the heavy doors of family offices and exclusive wealth management firms. We are going to demystify exactly how high net worth individuals protect and, more importantly, actually grow their wealth during economic downturns. And we'll be breaking all of this down using a highly effective framework I like to call the pyramid of preservation. So let me hook you right from the start with a pretty provocative question. What do billionaires actually do when the market crashes? Because it's a fascinating contrast to observe. When a recession hits, your average retail investor often falls right into emotional panic, liquidating their portfolios at the literal worst possible time. But the ultra-wealthy, they aren't panicking. They're making calculated, strategic moves that set them up for generational success. The stark reality here is that market crashes cause devastating wealth erosion if you aren't prepared for them. Behavioral biases just kick in, and that leads straight to panic selling. But here is the secret. For folks with structured defenses, downturns act as massive engines of wealth concentration. To put that into perspective, research shows that during just the first 2 years of the pandemic, the world's 10 richest men actually more than doubled their collective fortunes. We're talking going from $700 billion to $1.5 trillion, all while the broader economy was seriously struggling. How? Through pure strategic calculation. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap. We'll cover the anatomy of an economic crisis. And then we're going to build out our pyramid. That's strategy 1, cash reserves. Strategy 2, portfolio diversification. Strategy 3, tax loss harvesting. And strategy 4, estate planning. Finally, we'll look at how to turn a crisis into an opportunity. All right, part 1, the anatomy of an economic crisis and understanding the financial storm. First up, we really need to understand the environment we are operating in. Listen, a recession isn't the apocalypse. It's really just a recurring economic cycle of liquidity crunches and temporary price drops. And I want this heavy statistic to just sink in for a second. 10. The average length of a recession is only about 10 months. That's it, less than a year. Because it's just a temporary season, our primary goal in wealth preservation is basically just buying time so the markets can recover without us being forced to sell our assets. And that brings us to the absolute core mechanism of survival here, liquidity. Simply put, liquidity is your ability to meet your cash obligations without having to forcefully sell off your assets at a massive loss. When regular investors don't have liquidity, they become forced sellers. They end up unloading fundamentally sound assets at these steep discounts just to pay their everyday bills. Understanding this perfectly sets up our first foundational strategy. Which brings us to strategy 1, cash reserves, building out that core foundation of liquidity. This right here is the wide, rock-solid base of our preservation pyramid. You literally cannot build a resilient portfolio without a serious focus on cash. The golden rule is keeping a minimum of 6 months of your household or business operating expenses in cash or cash equivalents just to survive the initial shock. But as recent banking crises have brutally reminded us, where you put that cash really matters. Don't just dump all your funds in a single bank if they exceed that $250,000 FDIC insurance limit. You've got to spread those deposits out across multiple institutions to stay insured. For the rest of your cash, look into short-term 3- and 6-month U.S. Treasuries, which, have recently been yielding around 5%, or use Treasury-backed money market funds. Doing this keeps your capital completely safe, it actually earns a yield, and it stays entirely accessible. And this perfectly highlights the whole concept of dry powder. Having robust cash reserves isn't just some cozy safety blanket to help you sleep at night. No, it is offensive ammunition. When the market is in a total panic and prices artificially plummet because of a liquidity crunch, your cash reserves give you the ultimate power to be a strategic buyer. You get to step right in and acquire incredibly high-quality assets at bargain basement prices from all those forced sellers we talked about a minute ago. Once your cash foundation is locked in, we move right into strategy 2, portfolio diversification, where we spread out risk to protect your capital. You've probably heard that concentrated leverage creates wealth, but diversification is what actually protects it. Spreading your risk across different industries, geographies, and critically, different asset classes is the ultimate antidote to total loss from a black swan event. And this is a huge focus for institutional wealth. Different assets work together uniquely during a crisis. U.S. Treasuries sit at the very highest end of the liquidity spectrum, acting as your instant dry powder. Large cap stocks offer high liquidity and they're really easy to rebalance. Now, on the flip side, real estate and private equity are highly illiquid, but during a downturn, they become absolute prime targets for acquiring at massive discounts. The key takeaway is that every single asset class serves a very unique strategic purpose when things get rocky. But honestly, a massive hurdle to pulling off this kind of diversification is completely psychological. So many wealthy individuals, especially business founders, hold onto these single legacy blue chip stocks purely out of emotional attachment. But just think about companies like Kodak or Blockbuster. A sudden shift in consumer behavior or some wild technological advancement can make a heavily concentrated position basically worthless overnight. You absolutely must replace that emotional attachment with cold strategic logic. Spreading your investments out is how you prevent catastrophic portfolio devaluation. Moving further up the pyramid, we hit strategy 3, tax loss harvesting. This is all about turning losses into real tax advantages. Look, economic downturns are incredibly stressful for sure, but they also open up some truly fantastic fiscal windows. Tax loss harvesting is essentially the low-hanging fruit of a challenging economy. It lets you turn a market negative into a very tangible tax advantage. And the mechanics are actually super accessible. Step 1, you sell the assets that have dropped in value. Step 2, you use those realized losses to offset taxable gains in other parts of your portfolio. And then step 3, you take the proceeds and buy similar but not substantially identical assets so you maintain your exposure to the market. Just, be careful to avoid the IRS wash sale rule by maybe using ETFs or mutual funds as temporary substitutes. Overall, it allows you to reposition your entire portfolio with minimal tax ramifications. Finally, we reach the very apex of the preservation pyramid, strategy 4, estate planning, which focuses on efficient wealth transfer. So the crucial point here is that a recession is actually an incredibly strategic window for transferring wealth to the next generation. When the broader market declines, the valuations of your businesses, your real estate, and your equity portfolios temporarily drop right along with it. And this is huge, because many wealthy families have estates that far exceed the lifetime tax exemptions. That means any transfer over that limit gets hit with a staggering 40% tax. But if you transfer assets during a recession, getting them appraised when those valuations are temporarily low, you get to pass along significantly more of the asset's true potential before you ever hit that 40% threshold. Then, when the market eventually normalizes, your heirs realize the true rebounded benefits of that transfer completely tax efficiently. Let's bring this all together now, from crisis to opportunity, moving from just surviving to actually thriving. A recession, while incredibly painful for the broader economy, is fundamentally a moment of recalibration. It heavily rewards the people who institutionalize their decision-making and actually stick to a calculated plan. By preparing your cash reserves, aggressively diversifying your portfolio, optimizing your taxes, and executing those estate transfers, you aren't just surviving a crisis, you are actively thriving in the middle of it. So I want to leave you with a provocative thought to chew on. When the next economic storm hits, and trust me, it will, are you going to be a panic seller driven entirely by fear? Or will you be a strategic buyer armed with dry powder and a bulletproof pyramid of preservation? The choice you make today is exactly what fortifies your foundation for tomorrow. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and stay focused out there.